Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. I'm very happy to be with this extensive and phenomenal discussion and dialogue about Ayurveda on so many levels, so many pressing questions, from the ancient to the modern, to the personal, to the collective. Every aspect of Ayurveda will be covered. Now, I myself do come from a background of Ayurveda, now going back about, 50 years or so. I know it's a long time. And I was one of the few people in the West to really go into Ayurveda years ago. And of course, we had to adapt Ayurveda to our circumstances in the West, and also work with the global spread of Ayurveda at a time in which very little was known about Ayurveda and very few resources about Ayurveda were available. I also did extensive travel and work in India, and I've been to a lot of Ayurvedic schools and organizations and events over the years, some from Ayush, some from Ayurveda in different states, some with various individuals, companies, and organizations. More specifically, I've taken a broad integral view of Vedic education, in which I say we need to understand the Vedic sciences together. Ayurveda is closely connected to yoga, Samkhya, Vedanta, Tantra, Jyotish, mantra, psychology, spirituality, so many things. We need a broad view, but these are all part of the human life, and they're all part of our greater human nature and the deeper dimension of Ayurvedic healing. We don't just want to simply physicalize it or chemicalize it, but of course we have to address these particular issues as well. So we will be examining some of these issues, kind of major issues, question by question. I will give you my perspective. I'm joining you from my mountain hermitage in the mountains of the southwestern United States. And again, I'm very happy to be with you. And I feel this is an extremely important discussion, and that we as individuals must know how to communicate Ayurveda to our clients, to each other, and to engage in meaningful dialogue. Because Ayurveda must be applied according to time, place, and person, of course, environment. And so we cannot just use mechanical formulas, set prescriptions only, or reduce people to a category and then just kind of run off a series of things they're supposed to do or not do. So remember that living aspect of Ayurveda, and we're dealing with a living environment, living individuals, and the various life energies, psychological, spiritual energies involved. So we will now continue with our discussion. Yes, and I have to say very strongly, these are all relevant today. They form the philosophical, but also the terminological background of Ayurveda and the Vedic view of the universe. We are not, according to the Vedic view, living in a universe simply of chemicals and material things. Even in modern physics, the physical world has kind of disappeared into the quantum realities. So there is a Vedic view of consciousness, self-awareness, Atma, the mind, Chitta, but in a very different way, and an integral relationship between the individual human being, nature, the environment, the self-aware universe as a whole, and prana as a universal force, not just simply as some biological chemical energy, but pervading the biosphere and all life, and also extending to the universe as a whole. So Ayurveda, Ayur, of course, means harmony with the whole of existence, including inwardly, but with the body, prana, senses, mind, and Atma. and outwardly with all the pranic and forces of nature and elements, gunas, and so forth. So it must be carefully known and understood, but it is also something flexible. In other words, prana is like vayu, the wind, so you cannot just simply compartmentalize it and put one prana in one place and as if it's some physically measurable place or some particular organ in the physical body. So these are very important to know. You need an Ayurvedic and Vedic view of yourself and the universe, and integrating that with our modern view of self and universe is difficult because we are living in an age of where everything is mathematically defined and generally defined in mass, whereas the Ayurvedic view is to look at the specific individual and individual circumstances and adjust accordingly rather than to apply fixed and rigid rules. When it's cold, you put on something warm. When it's warm, you cool down. You can't have some rule that everybody's always going to put something warm on in order to feel better. Dharma itself is applied according to the circumstances of time, place, and person. Each person is unique, each circumstance is unique, yet they are also following universal forces. So we need that adaptability relative to Ayurveda. Samkhya, which is of course also Vedanta, it's rooted in Upanishads. You can find all of Samkhya and more in Prajna Upanishad alone. And we must then understand that the Samkhya gives us the Ayurvedic view of self and universe and psychology. Now, modern psychology is basically limited to the brain and chemistry. Samkhya Vedanta psychology also recognizes a subtle body, different aspects, chitta, buddhi, manas, ahankara. It also recognizes Purusha or Atma, which transcends all outer name, form, and number, whether it is gross or whether it is at a subtle level. So it's a view of consciousness that actually is at the cutting edge of modern physics and can guide modern psychology. It does recognize the connections that we have, the realities of Prakriti or nature, which is not defined merely in terms of chemistry or particles, but there are background forces, gunas, elements, qualities, levels of manifestations, living beings, and lokas, and ways of working with the forces of nature. For example, water always flows downhill. If you're trying to make water go uphill, you need a machine. It's not an easy thing to do. We need to understand nature, and we need to understand our nature, not only physically, but also psychologically, karmically, spiritually. And there, Ayurveda adds so much on so many different levels. We have a simple chikitsa for balancing the doshas at a physical level. We also have a sattva vijaya for increasing sattva guna in the mind. This sattvic lifestyle is the basis and the result of the yamas and niyamas, such as we find mentioned in the Yoga Sutras. And the divya or daiva chikitsa helps us connect to subtle energies and forces, karmic patterns, and connecting to a deeper self-awareness. So you need this foundation for Ayurveda to be Ayurveda. Otherwise, modern Ayurveda, remade in the image of modern medicine and a physical view of reality, then just becomes a shadow or an adjunct or something to add, but it is not the real basis of understanding or treatment. And then Ayurveda, connecting with the other Vedic disciplines, provides resources. How to work with prana. Prana is the prime healing force. How to work with mantra. Mantra is the key for healing the mind. and Ayurveda as the ultimate behavioral medicine, because it has the tools, the insights, the classifications to understand human behavior relative to doshas, gunas, karmas. So that is also very important. So in other words, Ayurveda expands us beyond our ordinary outer view of life and the world and takes us into an inner view of consciousness that can integrate physical healing on all levels with the deeper levels of healing of mind and consciousness. It's a big topic. It could go on for many hours or days. That is simply my introduction. So Ayurvedic education must be rooted in Ayurveda. It should dialogue with the modern medicine, make correlations where possible, recognize deficiencies Ayurveda may have, but also recognize that Ayurveda has certain teachings and insights that modern medicine needs, namely the constitution of the individual, nature of the mind, looking beyond the physical, our integration with nature as a whole. Those are many questions, and we will try to examine them as best we can. But the first point I want to bring out is Ayurveda has the most complex, intricate, and sophisticated form of herbal medicine in the world or history. Look at all the different preparations. Prash, Asavarishta, every sort of oil, Thailand, so many things. We could go on and on. The materia medica of herbs and products is huge. And the adaptation, not only of the herb, but how you prepare it, the yoga vahis, to make sure that it's having the right result. On top of that, you have the kind of local Ayurveda where people can get Ayurvedic herbs from their garden or from the Ayurvedic school or clinic. And then we have these huge Ayurvedic companies that, for example, Baba Ramdev's company are huge, and they can provide a large amount of products for people and at a level of the pharmacy, the Ayurvedic store, rather than the drugstore. And there are a tremendous number of preparations there. Now, at the same time, there's always an issue of available products. And even traditionally, Ayurveda had various substitutes or adaptations because the herbs were not always available at a particular locale. We also now have modern methods of preparing herbs, preserving herbs, and we have a whole medical industry in which there are chemicals, in which there are many other formulas and substances used. And we also know, for example, if you go to an herbal store or a store that sells herbs in the United States, you will find a number of Ayurvedic herbs, sometimes like ashwagandha sold individually, sometimes used in formulas with other herbs in the Western herbal materia medica that were not traditionally used in Ayurveda. There's a whole herbal industry now based on turmeric. There's Brahmi and so many different things. So that is also there. So what does the individual or the practitioner do? When you prescribe an herb, then there is a dosage, there is a time. Is it part of a greater formula? Often herbs work better in formulas, and preparations, of course, require a number of herbs, and then understanding or making the preparation properly and making sure that herbal products are properly preserved and potent. These are all important questions. And then we are often dealing with an audience of people who are not used to taking herbs, meaning that They may not always take the herbs. They may not be regular in their taking of the herbs. They may have something, what they regard as a side effect. So there are a number of considerations in just reintroducing the herbal medicine. And that is why we also have to have a good dialogue and communication and introduce herbs to patients in a slow-term way generally, particularly if they are for kind of general overall health maintenance. And if they are of specific and more powerful usage, introduce them to them to make sure there are no side effects. And of course, people will be taking other medicines, medications, vitamins, minerals, etc. So introducing or using the Ayurvedic herbs along with them is important. Now, also Ayurveda has very complex traditional formulas and sometimes dozens of herbs. So making those today is not always easy. And again, sometimes substitutes have to be used. And traditionally, there are many variations on formulas as well, primary and secondary ingredients. So a lot needs to be understood. And then we have so many modern Ayurvedic companies doing their proprietary medicines where they give it a proprietary name. It may be based on a traditional formula. The name may suggest what it does. It may be calming. It may be rejuvenative. It may be something for aiding in women's health and so forth. So it's quite a big situation. But what we recommend is that it's important that Ayurvedic practitioners have a good materia medica that they know. Over 100 herbs. In fact, it should be even more than that. Knowing the classical formulas, even if they may not use them or they may adapt them. We have simple things like triphala of 3 herbs. We also have, of course, many more complicated things. And then the Ayurvedic practitioner needs to work with some of the modern companies, understanding, applying the proprietary medicines and also getting the medicines to the clients, something that they can find and is affordable. And here too, Ayurveda is something then that's prescribed in various ways. And so there's not always direct contact with the patient. We'll probably talk about that later. But there is a need to continually adapt the formula. You cannot just give somebody medicines for 6 months and send them home. There has to be a regular dialogue with the doctor and an understanding of certain results or what the herb and the medicine is doing to the person. Of course, Ayurveda is also using, again, oils, even certain bhasmas, and there's many issues with all these complexity and intricacy of Ayurvedic products, but it also provides tremendous resources. So with these words, I will close this particular topic, which again could go on for quite a while. There's also issues of specific herbs and ways of usage that, and then of course, therapies, extending to specialized clinical therapies, etc., that come in here. But I would like to emphasize the importance of Ayurvedic massage oils for local treatment. And they have tremendous use and value. And besides the actual massage therapy, they can be used at home by people with their applications to the head, the back, to the skin, etc. They have tremendous value that no other system of medicine understands the oils or teaches us how to apply them or make them in so many forms. Now, the first point I want to raise is that most people today are suffering more from psychological issues. We have the epidemic of depression in the West, anxiety, It's hitting the children. There is now many more psychological drugs that are being prescribed, and even psychological diseases that weren't even recognized a few decades ago. And dealing with acute infectious diseases has been handled relatively well by modern medicine. And also dealing with structural problems, injuries, accidents, or improving things like vision through special surgery and so forth. These things are there. So the psychological dimension has to be addressed, and lifestyle. Most of the diseases we're having today are caused or aggravated by lifestyle, including things like diabetes, heart disease, all the psychological disease. And these include, of course, diet, behavior, exercise, communication. And now at a psychological level, we have all the media-based disorders, because the rapid electronic stimulation of the media disturbs the mind, creates more rajas and tamas. It often disturbs vata dosha more, but people who are just letting themselves be stimulated, that's kind of a tamasic condition. And it sometimes makes people angry, rajas and pitta. So we live in a world in which psychological issues cannot be ignored, nor can lifestyle and behavioral issues. Very few people today have decent diets, regular food times, cook their own food. There's so much fast food, junk food, fast eating. So, and then behavior, there's often lack of exercise, lack of rest, overstimulation, confinement in rather disturbing or even semi-toxic urban environments. The air is not good to breathe. You have to spend a lot of time just driving or in transit. So these special challenges today do become relevant to the psychological aspect also. At the same time, for example, again, people are not getting proper massages, which are more important the older you get. The exercise has become more rajasic, if it exists at all, so that people do need the yoga type asana-based exercise. They need to understand the use of proper diet, cooking, foods, herbal teas, and all the rest of it. So we have to say the yukti vyapashraya is necessary, but is not itself enough. And it was usually applied in context of the others. For example, even dealing with the dosha, you have to know how to deal with the psychology, the anger of pitta, or the agitation, anxiety of vata, the attachment of kapha dosha. There's always been a psychological dimension there, and an understanding of karma. You are not simply a victim in life or a product of external circumstances. You are responsible karmically for who you are, and who we are and what our health and well-being is depends upon how we live and what we think. It is not just simply a matter of physical parameters, however important these may be. So balancing doshas is important, and we have to understand doshas are also subtle energies. They're aspects of prana. They cannot be reduced to chemical formulas. They will have some chemical crossovers in terms of what happens when they get disturbed. And they're also, again, rooted in our behavior and our environment as well. We often say that if you look at doshas and gunas, they're like the two lines. If you make one horizontal and one vertical, then you get a precise point for understanding the person. If you have a chemical imbalance to deal with, somehow the person has disappeared. Now, chemical adaptations and changes are important, but we must remember there is always a living person there who has their own emotions, thoughts, karma, their own job, their own environment, their own changing circumstance. So Ayurveda does not use these factors like dosha and guna as kind of fixed chemical lines. They are general indications that require adaptation, and there are changes at a daily level, whether it's waking or during the day, sleep, daily changes, monthly changes, yearly changes. We look at the Jyotish, the dashas, and the transits involved. We have to recognize that living person and not just reduce them to a mechanical formula or make the disease the most important thing. Let me make this very clear. There's no such thing as a disease in itself. Hepatitis, diabetes, heart disease, whatever you give it, is a dysfunction of a living person. It doesn't exist in itself. Of course, there are contagious diseases where there are pathogens, but even those come in according to some weakness of ojas or immunity in the person. Now, we have the issue of medical treatment today, even post-COVID. For example, in the United States, you often will never see a doctor. You communicate with the doctor by phone or perhaps by the internet. They will recommend a sophisticated set of medical testings. You'll go to a laboratory, which will do that. They send the results to the doctor. Of course, you get a copy as well. And then the doctor will make a prescription based upon those chemical or imbalances or organic dysfunctions which are revealed. And the doctor will not actually know you or interact with you personally. They will be polite and considerate and make certain that you are taking the medicine. Some medicines may be recommended to take for several months before you go back to the doctor and have them examined. And then the other thing, the doctors are specialists. They're not dealing with the whole person. They're dealing with, say, someone has colitis. There's certain specialists that will be dealing with these type of digestive problems or whatever disease it is. And you may then, if you have more than one problem, you may have to go to several of these. And if you have psychological issues involved, you may have to go to psychologist as well. The average senior in America, I am presently approaching my age of 73. The average person my age is taking 10 to 15 medications a day for different things, and even sometimes to counter the side effects of medications. That being said, we also now have telemedicine, even in Ayurveda, and we no longer have the time or the access to go to the practitioners or necessarily to regularly get the therapy because of issues of time, distance, expense. And of course, sometimes the Ayurvedic doctor is giving general advice that just requires communication with the patient, not just always requiring examination. But that being said, we must begin by seeing the patient and doing the thorough examination of the medical history, trying to understand the individual, trying to educate them about Ayurveda at different levels, whether it's Ayurvedic cooking or bringing the value of meditation. And we must have that living relationship with the person. They're not just patient 47Y, and they don't just have this list of VPK and whatever, and then the organic functions. There's a person there, and you need to have a courteous relationship with them, and one that aids their education and raises their spirit, not just pronounces diagnosis on them that they may not understand or know. That being said, telemedicine can be helpful because it's not always possible for people to go to the good Ayurvedic practitioner. And the Ayurvedic practitioners are not easy to find. They may be someone who is some hours away. So the journey to the Ayurveda clinic is sometimes itself a difficult thing. So telemedicine has its place. It also allows the Ayurvedic doctor more regular interaction with the patient, and then the patient can get directly in touch with the doctor as needed. And by telemedicine, there's a more direct interaction and, of course, just talking over the phone. That being said, we can't just turn Ayurveda into a franchised telemedicine. We have to keep its a living dimension and make sure the patient comes in periodically for direct examination, and also make sure the patient is keeping some journal or record of their daily health activity or their daily symptoms to communicate, so that the telemedicine continues with the physical dimension. And of course, communication that is necessary. I do know Dr. Partap Chauhan for many years. I know how he worked hard to get this going. And of course, one can argue it has limitations. It does. It has convenience. And we can also combine it with the medicine, because we're no longer able to get the freshly made Ayurvedic products so much. We have to use proprietary medicine or medicine that has been formulated and made according to certain circumstances. So the doctor needs to know the positive and negative aspects of the medicine. As a sidelight here in the United States and the West, many herbalists prescribe what are called tinctures, which are alcoholic extracts of the herbs. The good thing about it, it's inexpensive and it's not difficult to do. But it's not a panacea, because tinctures only extract what alcohol can take out. If you can't substitute a tincture for a food or a tonic or Rasayana, whatever, it works at a more subtle level. So we have to understand what we're prescribing and the level on which it works, not just the herb, but the formulation involved. And again, we have to adapt to the modern world without downsizing Ayurveda. And for this, we need to promote more Ayurvedic education. And basics of Ayurveda should be taught along with basics of biology or medicine. And in the India context, the understanding of life in terms of prana and consciousness and its interrelationship with the environment, not just life as chemistry or structure, but life as the actual living entity involved and living environment involved. In this regard, Ayurveda is the ultimate ecological form of medicine, and we can also integrate it with an ecological view and a protection of nature. Food is a vehicle for prana, and of course, a lot of processing and packaging tends to remove the prana. Prana comes out more in the juice. Of course, you can take a powdered herb and you can put it in warm water or something else to extract. You can also make special extracts and all of that. But we have to understand the nature and limitations of processed food. Ayurveda for hundreds of years, thousands of years, has used processed herbal preparations, and that there were the asavas, arishtas, all the oils, or all the prash. I mean, there's so many things that Ayurveda has said that processing in an organic or natural way is necessary or very helpful. We also now have processing in a chemical or artificial way. And we also have foods that have been on the shelf for a long time. So first of all, try to understand how much prana is there in your diet. And that can be considered by not just the processed food, but how much of the natural foods and fresh foods you are taking, and how well these are prepared and made. Now, adding ginger to an artificially made food or process or something frozen, whatever, is a antidote, or it is, I'd say, you're countering, you're trying to improve, but it's not a full substitute. That being said, having proper spices or herbal teas along with your meals, even if your meal, of course, is processed food, restaurant food is also helpful. I'm not saying that restaurant food is always processed, but is usually not as freshly made. And that not to criticize the restaurants, there are many great restaurants also, and they're often better than the processed foods. But we must introduce cooking back into the curriculum as part of life, not just for the girls, but for everyone, and part of the home. In fact, if you don't have good meals, that's one of the reasons why the homes and people's relationships are suffering today. Now, of course, everybody's working, so that's not easy. There's a lot of food, fruits, vegetables, etc., that can be taken fresh. And like the herbs, there are natural preparations that can be used, but we cannot, in the end, substitute entirely. We have to recognize that a certain portion of our diet should be based upon fruit, vegetables, dairy products. I mean, there are things we can get that don't require that they have been freeze-dried or frozen or chemically additive. Of course, many foods have to have certain preservatives added along to them. Of course, in India, you can go down to your local market and get fresh food, vegetables almost any time. Market may be crowded, but that is there. So we have to make diet and food important, Anabrahma, and we can cut corners here and there, but we have to recognize the qualities of the food and the prana involved, how they affect the doshas. And of course, we have to consider the state of our Agni, or digestive fire, and how to preserve that. Often irregular eating, taking cold drinks along with your meal suppresses the Agni, or putting heavy sweets on top of the Agni afterwards. Understand the proper regulation of the Agni and the foods that you are able to have. Do your own tongue diagnosis and see the condition of the ama within you. And even, of course, we may have to have prepared foods, but do some dietary retreats, or you can do some detox diets for a while, rejuvenative diets in the fall, and of course, with the herbs and things involved, adapt your diet and also adjust it daily, seasonally, give it some regularity, understand it relative to your dosha. You don't need to be a fanatic about it, but we do need to make adjustments and be chemically aware of what is there in your food or what things are called. For example, in the United States, most of the so-called olive oil is adulterated with other oils, often in a majority. So unless you're getting pure olive oil, then even though it says something, it's maybe something else. So understand and be aware of what's happening with your foods. And also if you're taking any pharmaceutical drugs, be aware of the side effects. And even with Ayurveda, be aware of the regulations involved. So that again is a very big topic. Again, we're forced to adjust relative to our modern circumstances, but we do have to consider their limitations. Even what do? We take vacations. We go out in nature. We go into the park. Why? Because the urban environment has a lot of rajas and tamas in it. The air may be unhealthy, it's too noisy. In this regard, also compensate for the media. What do I mean here? Through the senses, we also are taking in prana. If there is prana in what we are experiencing through the senses. If you're out in nature, you get a tremendous prana from the sky, the plants, the mountains, the waters. If we spend the whole day with the media, particularly with politics and anger or violent movies, of course, we're creating more disturbance in the mind. I tell students that we will let people into our minds that we would never let into our homes. So look at your nutrition relative to sensory perception and make sure before you sleep at night that you have some chanting, mantra, meditation, music. Clear your sensory field and don't let this disturbance going on. You see, the media, good or bad, there's many great media people. I've done a lot of work even with some of the television channels in India. It's necessary, but we have to compensate for the electrical influence of the media and how it programs our minds in a limited way. For example, obviously, a screen is two-dimensional. You can imagine depth, but you really don't see it. So if we look at screens, we lose our depth perception. To understand reality, you need a depth perception. So a lot of our healing work is adjusting to our mechanical, artificial world and its benefits. I mean, computers, even artificial intelligence have their benefits, but they're not substitutes for life, prana, and consciousness, and compensating for them is part of a healthy Ayurvedic lifestyle. Even the traditional visiting of temples and practicing of pujas. You're working with all the 5 elements, all the 5 tanmatras, you're creating sattva guna, you're improving the mind. It's a part of this whole sattva vijaya and daiva chikitsa parts of Ayurveda, which are also necessary to do. Again, a big subject. I may have missed a few points here and there, but please examine it very thoroughly in your own education, in your own meditation. Yes, we've touched upon this a bit briefly, and again, it's affecting not only medicine, but almost everything we do, even going to whatever you're a lawyer or whatever, accountant, whatever. There's very little personal contact left, and some of the benefits, you don't have to travel so far. But again, you're dealing with a living individual. And since Ayurveda is rooted in the determination or diagnosis of the individual, and communicating with them and having a rapport. It's through the rapport of the doctor and the client that prana is transmitted, that motivation can be stimulated and changed in a positive direction, or that any counseling or psychological activity can go on. In fact, many people are suffering from lack of communication. They don't have anybody to talk to about what they are or what they do. I'm not saying Ayurvedic person should be a substitute for that, but there has to be some communication with the individual and the relationship between the doctor and the patient at an individual level, rather than the relationship between the doctor and the spreadsheet of the last medical testing and all of that, which of course has its importance. So again, telemedicine cannot be the only factor. It must be adapted at times. Foundation should be there. How often should these direct sessions go on? Should it be once a week, once a month, once every 3 months? A lot depends upon the patient, the disease, the location, but the communication has to be there, not only with the doctor, but the communication with Ayurveda, the communication with yoga. There will be yoga classes somewhere, Ayurvedic massage. You can go to Ayurvedic stores where you can get certain special Ayurvedic foods and preparations. There's an Ayurvedic society or culture, or you might say group, that can support people in their lifestyle. But we can't just make it mechanical. Pulse is a way of connecting to the person's prana. You cannot just reduce it to a number or a formula. So many things. I mean, you can get some medical testing, some dysfunction with the liver, some issues with the lungs. It's helpful to know. Take the lungs, but if you have something like pranayama you can do, or you can have svedana, massage, other things going on. So there is the Ayurvedic doctor just giving general advice or checking up on the patient, particularly for the taking of herbs or how symptoms are ongoing. But then there's the whole range of Ayurvedic treatments that can be recommended. Of course, the traditional doctor did not perform the full panchakarma himself or herself. And so there should be an integration of Ayurvedic therapies into the lifestyle based upon not only disease, but health maintenance, age, and seasonal issues. So it's not just the patient and the Ayurvedic doctor on the screen. There are also other therapists that they can go to, and Ayurvedic retreats for corporates, for people of certain age or certain disease symptoms, integration of yoga and Ayurveda at yoga ashrams, which we're seeing more of. I have to tell you, when I first came to India several decades ago, almost none of the yoga centers had Ayurveda or talked about it. Now, mostly all of them do and have brought Ayurveda back into that. And the point I would also like to make is that yoga chikitsa is a part of Ayurveda. It's particularly connected to the sattva vijaya, but even the daiva chikitsa, even at a physical level. And the yamas and niyamas of yoga are the foundation of the sattvic way of life, and also chitta shuddhi, purifying the mind, which is the basis for all psychological treatment. So crossover there as well. So communication is necessary. We want telemedicine to facilitate communication, but not to substitute for it, and not to be mechanical, but also engage in understanding the patient. I know some of the telemedicine and Ayurveda, they take the recording, they keep track of these, and they develop a line of communication. It is challenging. And of course, there are simple conditions that you can deal with fairly easily. And there are simple recommendations you can make. Not everything requires a lot of time and examination. And the importance of lifestyle behavior is there. And of course, if a person has a serious disease or is taking very strong herbal medications or even chemical medications and even rasas, basmas, then of course more monitoring is required. But telemedicine is now an integral part of the medicine, but it should not be a substitute for the rest, but rather an adjunct or a means of bringing the patient into a greater Ayurvedic lifestyle or therapies, many of which are part of normal health maintenance. They're not just limited to specific conditions. And then there's also the big question of immunity. And I would like to take a little more time relative to immunity. I like to discuss immunity relative to physical and psychological immunity. They are connected. We have ojas, we have this whole ability to resist disease. For example, physical immunity, of course, depends upon ojas, it depends upon balancing the doshas, it depends upon having proper prana, natural food, good environment, and of course, it also depends upon sattva guna, because obviously overactivity that weakens immunity, and tamas causes you inertia, which also weakens immunity. Psychological immunity is very important. And what is that? That is the ability, physical immunity, you can deal with physical heat, cold, dampness, dryness. Not that you should always expose yourself to these, but you have a certain amount of resistance to external pathogens and energies. Psychological immunity, you would also need resistance to insults, flattery, and disturbances in the world. The COVID panic, for example, caused a lot of trouble, that besides the COVID itself. So there are psychological issues, and then dealing with anger, anxiety, all these things, to develop a steady prana, a calm mind, and a steady gaze, so that you're holding your power of attention, your dharana shakti. Don't let into your mind something which is negative or destructive. Have a good buddhi to discern the true and false, and protect your psychological sphere. And don't get caught up in these mass collective emotions. Have your own judgment. Don't turn yourself simply into a victim of external forces, but try to build up a positive way of life. Now, back to this question of vaccination. Your best vaccination in life is to live a healthy lifestyle in the sattvic, pranically charged environment with a good sadhana, connection to nature, proper sensory impressions, proper food, beverages, spices, herbs. It's based upon the intrinsic energy and constitution of the person. It is not simply limited to a vaccination you may take. Now, in case of the COVID, India was one of the rare countries that did not limit treatment primarily to the vaccine. Ayurveda was recognized as having value, yoga as having value. The vaccine was said to be helpful during the acute phase of the pandemic. Of course, there were different vaccines, and not all of them had the same results. But in terms of our long-term development and sustenance of immunity, that depends upon behavior, lifestyle, state of mind, proper use of the sense organs and motor organs, all of that. So we must keep that in mind. And vaccines are not a panacea, but they are very helpful. And for certain conditions, they prove to be very helpful. Polio, many of these conditions, they've done quite well. At the same time, even what sometimes we have to be careful what vaccine means. For example, vaccine was meant to be something that prevents you from getting something. Today, sometimes the term vaccine is used for something that makes it more likely you'll do better if you come down with something. So we need to understand the different nature of vaccines and their limits, and also what it is they can accomplish, and how to adapt them on an individual basis. People with low immunity, sometimes the vaccine is very good, but sometimes the vaccine can have side effects. Again, I don't want to be criticizing anyone. These type of necessary adaptations are there with every medicine and every therapy, but don't let the vaccination substitute for a lifestyle that improves ojas, immunity, balances doshas, increases prana, gives calm of mind. How you live on a daily basis is the basis of your immunity in the primary sense. There are, of course, at times congenital factors or difficult circumstances. So the vaccinations do not invalidate Ayurvedic way of life or Ayurvedic products and treatment. They can support in some ways. They should not simply substitute for that. And we also remember that you may be taking them with other chemical medications, and this all has to be considered, because anything that is chemically based or that has a strong energy positively can sometimes have side effects as well. And we have to, in fact, it's very interesting to note, and I don't want to sound too controversial here, but in the medical world in the United States, when they've been trying to reduplicate medical testing that has proven the validity of certain drugs, the reduplication doesn't always work. In other words, diseases change and collectivity, society changes. So what might have worked in a circumstance some decades ago may not work or may need other adaptation in circumstances today. There's no finality for formulas or treatment. They also require individual adaptation, time, place, and person. So this is my views on these topics. Again, they need a lot of dialogue and discussion. We shouldn't portray them as black and white. We need to understand and use something like a tool when it's necessary. So certain tools will do some things, they won't do others. Hari Om. Very important questions. And the first question, the first point I want to wake up is, what is evidence-based medicine and what is evidence? I'll give you another example from the American pharmaceutical industry. In order to get a drug approved by the FDA for efficacy, they have to have the evidence of 3 major clinical trials that shows that the drug is effective in dealing with whatever particular condition it is meant to address. The problem is the pharmaceutical companies can do any number of trials that fail. That is not counted. You only need 3 that succeed. You know, how many, I'm not saying there's necessarily a lot that fail. And again, as I mentioned just earlier, sometimes when they attempt to repeat these studies, the evidence doesn't come out the same way. And then also, when you're doing evidence of a group, what group is that? Different age groups, different dietary, people taking different diets, people having different jobs, living in different environments. It's a very different results can come up relative to the circumstances, because human beings have their variabilities. So in other words, evidence-based medicine is something that you are aiming at. There's no such thing as the last evidence. Say you've done, I've done this trial study on 300 people. Great, if it worked, well, if it worked, it may have some benefits, but there are 7 billion people in the world. Are they going to work the same way on different people? And they're based upon addressing certain diseases. But certain diseases have a lot of variability in their stages and symptoms. or in the age or behavior of the person involved. In other words, there's no black and white evidence. Generally, it's aimed at has the medicine improved the disease symptoms, or has it eliminated the disease altogether? And does it do so for a variety of people? Now here, Ayurveda, of course, has a very specialized individual typology, which modern medicine does not have. Not to say modern medicine doesn't address individual variations of age, sex, hormones, organ functions, and all of that. But Ayurveda introduces there are different types of people, and what may work on one type may not work on another, or even dietary things. Kapha dosha people, you don't give them a lot of cold dairy products. It's not that dairy is toxic. So these factors have to be borne in mind. You're gaining some degree of evidence, but you don't have the last word. Society is changing, individuals are changing, there are toxins in our environment or in our food, our air that can also imbalance our systems. There are genetic issues involved. So we can't say, oh, our group, our medicine is clinically proven to work. No, clinical studies suggest that it may work, or that it has a good probability of working under certain circumstances. But we can't make it the last word. And we can't say that, oh, an Ayurvedic medicine doesn't have that degree of evidence-based proof, so it's not of any value. Or that its evidence-based proof is for one thing, but not for another, so it can only be recommended for one thing. So there is also, of course, the medicine based upon behavior and based upon history. For example, if Ayurvedic medicines have been used to treat certain conditions for centuries, then they're worthy of some study, and that experiential part of it deserves some degree of recognition as evidence, whether it's enough to prove that it works. And then you must also apply Ayurvedic medicines in an Ayurvedic context. What happens today is take a certain disease, arthritis, heart disease, and then one group will be given a well-known pharmaceutical drug, and the other one will be given an herb, and then see which works better. Well, obviously the drugs are more powerful, herbs are part of a lifestyle, so it's really not a fair examination. So you have to compare not just Ayurvedic herbs or Ayurvedic medicines and modern chemical medicines together on a neutral audience. We also have to apply Ayurvedic treatment as a whole. Is the Ayurvedic treatment as a whole, which includes certain herbs helping with your diabetes, not just as is it going to be better than the insulin or whatever, or used with it or not used with it, etc. So these things must be carefully borne in mind. So the ultimate evidence of medical efficacy is that people are healthier and happier and are better in control of their own life and health, and that the doctor is more of an advisor, and that the medical testing is an adjunct or an aid, but is not a substitute for right living. Now, if we look at the situation in the world today, we do have some problems. For example, the longevity in the United States is going down over the last few years. It's now estimated that the average male in America has a longevity 3 to 5 years less than would have been there 10 years ago or more. We see a lot of psychological disorders, immunity problems, allergy issues. I'm not saying that we have to blame the medicine for that, but purely evidence-based medicine is not in itself enough. We also have to treat right lifestyle, right behavior. And of course, modern medicine does recommend that, not to the degree that, or the specificity that Ayurveda does, but in a significant and important manner. And there we need some integration of Ayurveda and modern medicine. Modern medicine is very good for all these surgical procedures, more or less, for example. But Ayurveda, relative to natural living, you can call it naturopathy, you can call it yogic living, ecological living. It's not just countering pathogens or imbalances that we need. We need a way of promoting positive health. And it's not just a matter of making people live longer, but also making them live longer in a way that is comfortable and they feel good. It's not just a question of keeping people alive. In fact, a lot of the medical expense in the Western world goes on the majority of it goes on the last 3 months of the lives of people. The other thing I want to address here too is this incredible epidemic of drugs, pharmaceutical and recreational, that's going on in the West. I sometimes add the digital drug as another one. And then now there's a lot of abuse or overuse of prescription medicines, opioids. There's been even major suits where the pharmaceutical companies have had to pay for their overuse of them, people getting addicted to them, overuse of medications on various levels. Again, I'm not saying you blame the medical practitioner or practice for it. It is the application. But we definitely still have health challenges. And again, overall, living in harmony with nature and living in harmony with your own nature is very important. Your body is your earth. You have to respect your body just as you respect the earth on which you live. Your breath is your prana. Your vital force is your prana. It's like the atmosphere. If you don't have air to breathe, if your atmosphere is polluted, how is it going to help you? But say too, you have to have a good use of your own prana when it is there. Mind is reflected in media, communication, education. We also need to cultivate a higher consciousness. Healing requires giving of consciousness. The very fact that you give attention to an issue, that the therapist draws your attention to what you're doing, gives you care and consciousness through the therapy, all of that is helping to raise your consciousness and giving you that therapy that involves the consciousness and the use of the mind. Point I also like to raise, I've done this a bit in my Ayurveda in the Mind book too, is that we classify certain psychological diseases. You can do it chemically, or you can even do it emotionally. But the mind is an energetic system. It's not just a matter of analyzing the mind. We must learn how to use the mind's energies properly. If you don't make a proper use of your eyes, if you don't make a proper use of your attention, if you have a lot of rajas and tamas, that will affect the mind also. So it's very important that we also balance and understand the energies that we take into the mind and express through the mind. And meditation and also mantra is the way you make the mind sattvic. It helps us change the mental pattern. There's a very important rule here with the mind. Whenever you engage your attention in something, when it kind of crosses over the 50% line, it colors the entire mind down to the subconscious level. What is your dominant thought in life? If your dominant mental activity is more inquiry, meditation, study, then you have a different mindset than if it's just simply entertainment, or if it's based upon things you take chemically. So it's very important that we have this proper understanding of the mind. The mind organizes the prana and the body, the right use of the sense and the motor organs. What does Ayurveda say? Main cause of disease is prajnaparada, which is the failure of the consciousness, intelligence, and awareness. Wrong use of the senses and motor organs. What are you taking in through your senses? What are you putting out through your motor organs? It is a healing force, or is it a force of disturbance, destruction, or distraction? And then, of course, we have the basic factors of diet, lifestyle, sleep. How much deep sleep are you getting? That supports your ojas. People aren't getting that now. And so during the day, if you don't have the ojas to sustain your awareness and mind, then you're going to do things or have emotions that you would not otherwise want or would otherwise be positive. What is your sankalpa, your motivation in life? Are you here to have fun? Are you here to, that's fine to be happy, of course, but are you here to achieve a higher purpose, or are you just here to do what's going around you, kind of like the leaf blowing in the wind that's happening there? The awakening of the Atma, that's always part of Ayurveda, because you need that self-awareness, understanding of the mind, and ability to observe. Often we buy according to advertising, or we follow based upon propaganda. If you go buy fruit at the store, you have to look at and examine with the detached mind the quality. You don't just go down the aisle and throw in something from one side and something from the other. You have to apply your buddhi or intelligence towards your food, your medicine, and how you live. And Ayurveda is the best system, I feel, for helping us do that. So in summary, overall, Ayurveda has tremendous resources, and a lot of its resources are relevant to modern psychology for understanding the mind, modern medicine for understanding prana. Why is it that modern medicine doesn't have a concept of prana? For them, life is a more complex or different form of chemistry. Would you trade your life for the most expensive, complex, nice collection of chemicals in the world? No. So there is prana as something. There is consciousness beyond the brain. The brain is an excellent instrument, and we need to take care of it. We need to monitor it. We need to use it in diagnosis properly, but we don't need to limit ourselves to the chemistry of brain function. Brain is an instrument of the mind. Mind is an instrument of consciousness. If we go to a deeper level of awareness, meditation, mantra, Sanskrit also has the ability to change chemistry and calm the mind. Even pranayama will change, or right use of the senses, mantras, yantras, being out in nature, contemplation, etc. Ayurveda, like the other Vedic disciplines, was originally taught in nature, and you integrated or you worked with the plants, the preparations, the environments, the elements, the different typology involved. So Ayurveda is extremely relevant, but because of its individualized orientation and its understanding of the whole of life and nature, we cannot reduce it to simple formulas or paradigms or mathematical equations. We cannot simply, we can use tools. I mean, it's obviously there's ways of judging the blood pressure, etc. The medical testing is very important, but we also have to understand the prana, the mind, the consciousness, and also that herbs have a prana that cannot necessarily be turned or understood chemically. Chemistry has its limitation. Not every herb has one active ingredient or even an active ingredient that can be extracted. Herbs, like foods, have complex chemistry, but they address the living being. You're not the product of one chemical or another. And chemistry is reflecting very complex pranic reaction, 5 pranas, 10 pranas, also doshas, gunas, and also environmental influences, forces of time. Prana comes from the sun. There's another prana that can come from the moon. Water flows in prana. That's why the rasa dhatu has to be pure to hold the proper energy of prana. If your samana vayu is imbalanced, then the jataragni is thrown out. As we age, there's more apana vayu because the force of gravity pulls us down, including physically and even psychologically. So there's much for us to understand. I'd like to call these the holistic energies, or kind of, for example, liver, lungs, these are organs. But prana is not an organ. Mind is also not an organ. Atma is not an organ. These are functioning at all levels, maybe perhaps in different ways. We also, doshas are not just simply, they have their organic connection, but they're not on one level. So Ayurveda brings in these broader overall understanding of forces, doshas, pranas, elements, different levels of mind, consciousness, and then it has its respective tools for dealing with these: pranayama, pratyahara, mantra, jyotish, daivya, chikitsa, medya rasayanas. I have to mention that. We really have to use more of the medya rasayanas and not just give people drugs for the mind. There are so many of these, all this Brahmi or Mandukaparni or Jatamansi or Shilajit, Shankapushpi, etc., or even herbal teas, Brahmi, Tulsi, not just simply coffee. I do like my little bit of tea and green tea, but we need to integrate these positive, simple factors of Ayurveda there. The understanding of oils, for example, ghee and its ability to help strengthen the Majjadhatu. We don't always need the most complex or the most recent chemical drug to deal with the nervous system or brain issue. There are other organic ways to deal with that. And nature is full of healing forces, whether it's the air, the water, the sky, the clouds, the flowers, the fresh herbs, the fresh foods. We cannot be healthy as individuals if we are not linked to and part of a healthy environment and lifestyle, and we have to honor our harmony with life, society, and nature. So Ayurveda is unique that it's able to address the whole of life on all these levels. Modern medicine is becoming so specialized that there's no longer a general practitioner. There's just a degree of so many specialists to choose from, so that we lose the view of our lives and our social health overall, and we get caught in specialized diseases and specialized chemistry for them. And we forget the living person, the living environment, and that we can be healthy and happy if we follow nature and our nature and understand nature, not just by chemistry, but by our interaction with it and by understanding how nature works. That takes us back to yoga, Samkhya, and to use the full, everything we do in life is either making us better or worse. Are we, as our breath, improving our vitality? Are we breathing in such a way that weakens it? It's a very important question. Are sensory impressions giving us more energy and awareness, or are they dulling us out or getting us disturbed? Is our food increasing our strength and well-being, or is it making us overweight or disturbed? Are we getting proper deep sleep? There's so much we have to look at. And then, yes, there are very important surgeries and clinical remedies and certain drugs for acute conditions that need to have their place, and in which there are a lot of evidence is coming out there. But the ultimate evidence of our well-being is our own life, and our own awareness. What is the evidence of your life and well-being and the society, the family? Certainly there's much we can do to make things better. We need medical practitioners on all levels. We need a variety of therapists. We need a lot of practical healing methods and seasonal routines and daily routines and monthly routines and issues relative to women's health, issues relative to, look at what's happening in the West, the epidemic now of Alzheimer's disease. All these things are suggesting that we need a broader medicine that can integrate what's good in modern medicine or be part of it, but that also connects us to life, nature, consciousness at a deeper level. So with these words, I will close my discussion. I'm surprised we've actually covered a lot of time. I did not have any script. I just learned about the questions 5 minutes before we started this particular event, but these are important and relevant questions. You will get a number of important points of view on them, some that might appear contrary, but please learn to examine them because there are always two sides to things, and there's a proper application and also limits to an application. And we don't just create an idea of a panacea. There's not an herb that everybody can take at any time and they're all going to be better over it. What we need is, again, something that adjusts to the rhythms of our lives, not just as developed at or judged at a chemical level, but also examined at the level of how we feel, our power of awareness. And so for longer well-being, and I'm speaking in the India context specifically, yoga and Ayurveda and the basic principles of prana, meditation, these should be taught in the schools, not as an indoctrination, but as a right way to use the mind, the senses. If you don't have control of your own power of attention, then someone else does, which means they're going to be telling you what to do, and chances are they're going to make you pay for it. You need to be a master of your own life, but you have to have the proper guides in these specialized areas and the overall education. So in other words, in closing, we need to make Ayurveda relevant in a modern educational and environmental and ecological context at physical, psychological, and consciousness levels. Have it being willing to adapt to what is positive tools, developments, and medicine, but also to bring in broader issues. Herbs will remain. We can never create drugs that are going to substitute for herbs. Herbs may have a slower or more long-term action, but we have to recognize the value of what we have. Food has its own value. Cooking has its own value. Intelligence we have to develop through inquiry. Vichara, we need Ayurveda Vichara. We had that in Kodakal a while ago, a program. So we need to develop our mind and awareness, and you need a good buddhi. The doctor will help you do that, but we also have to have the proper education that teaches us the right way of using the mind, the senses, and the body. And Ayurveda has much to offer. Ayurveda has much to adapt, much to learn. There are different countries throughout the world, changing lifestyles, changing medicine, but Ayurveda inherently has the tools that allow us to adapt because it teaches us to look at what is actually happening, the energies and the qualities involved, not just give it a name and apply a mechanical way to treat it. So Ayurveda has that broad view and adaptability that we need today. Now, that being said, as Ayurvedic teachers and practitioners, you say, oh, but there's so much I have to learn. Yes, some of it is simple. You may specialize in various ways or fields. That's also necessary. And of course, you will learn more over time. At the same time, the basic corpus of Ayurvedic knowledge and application has tremendous benefits. We don't claim that we have all the benefits and you shouldn't go somewhere else, but that we do have something for you to offer to integrate into a healthy life and also a healthy mind, and if you want, a sadhana as well. So I want to thank the organization for organizing this event, and Vaidyagram and Punarnava, all these are very well known. And I have to say, no one else has given me so many questions and the freedom and the length of time to speak. I have done some very nice discussions in India. Of course, some may be more specialized, but as an overall view of Ayurveda, I'm glad that I was able to address this with the help of and Ram Prasad, the help of the people and the organizations involved, and for you to take the discussion forward. It's a living discussion that should go on and encourage you to think and rethink and even reinvent and see what the real evidence is to the extent of your connection with Ayurveda. Ayurveda is helpful at a level of personal living and self-healing, and then it moves up to all the clinical, medical therapies, specific factors, and the psychological and the spiritual. So it is truly the medicine of life. So with these words, I will close. Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. I wish you the best, and you, particularly the young people coming up, you are the generation that can save the world. I'm not just telling a joke, but you are necessary to maintain healing and to integrate the challenges of the modern world with the wisdom of Vedic knowledge and yoga, in which you are truly addressing those challenges and not just simply losing the connection, and in which you are taking the essence of yoga and Ayurveda and allowing it to be a rasayana for the society, adapting it as you need to different circumstances, even to the proper use of machines, artificial intelligence. We need to create our own Ayurveda somas, which we have. We don't just simply need to use the medications or the drugs, certainly not, but we need to know their value and their place and not exclude anything that has value, but integrate it into a broader view of healing, consciousness, well-being for all human beings, all life, and all nature. Hari Om Tat Sat. Again, I'm very happy to have had this discussion, and I look forward to future connections with all of you. I have a simple website at vedanet.com, vedanet.com. Lots of online articles there. I have a number of published books. Mostly you can get through Motilal Banarsidass. There's over a couple dozen books on Ayurveda and related factors. And of course, there are so many good organizations doing work. And if you can have living live instruction and also connection with the teacher, the doctor, that is very important. And events like this serve to create a foundation, a view, and a breadth for that. Hari Om.